So our session, my partner in crime, Kira Goldner, we will be providing an overview of different careers in AI and tech ethics fields. We will focus on the importance of multidisciplinary backgrounds for both careers and advocacy, and provide tips on how to get involved. Like all the other sessions, we will look to leave time for chat questions at the end. And myself, I'll be continuing with the next session, but Kira will be available for 15 minutes for the AMA on Twitter after our session. So Kira Goldner is postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University and co-founder of Mechanism Design for Social Good. Kira, since I'm host and presenter in this session, I'll move right to introductions for ourselves. Would you like to give us a brief intro to yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So I am currently a postdoc at Columbia, where I'm affiliated with both the computer science department and the data science institute. I'm going to talk a lot more about my background in my talk, but basically I do research in mechanism design for social good, and I started this organization which has blown up into something else, which I can't really claim to be mine anymore. It's much bigger than that, and I'm excited to tell you about it.
That's great. So while I continue with the session, can I ask you to share the slides for us? Thank you so much. So my name is Merve Hickok. I'm the founder at AIethesis.org. I'm an independent consultant and trainer on AI ethics. I was formerly a VP in HR at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, responsible globally for recruitment technologies and diversity recruitment initiatives. I currently also work for a social enterprise in Nevada, developing learning systems and technologies for people with disabilities. So within that role, I manage projects, process improvements, and our information privacy and security areas. Can we move to the second one? Cool. I'm not going to spend obviously the multiple minutes on what I do, but the reason I'm sharing this slide at the hand is your time with us today is very precious, and I do want to thank you all again. We appreciate it a lot, and we would like to make this session as useful to you as possible. Both Kira and myself would like to talk about careers in AI and tech ethics from different perspectives, her from a technical background, mathematical background, and mine from a non-technical one. Not only sharing our personal experiences, but also sharing some of the mentoring, coaching, and advocacy works that we've been involved in and how that might relate to you. But this session really became all the more relevant this week with news of Timnet. So we would both like to dedicate our session and extend our support to her and to all those who are trying to push the boundaries and do the right thing. As an AI ethicist, a mentor, and a career coach, I get a lot of questions about the educational backgrounds and professional backgrounds and what is involved in this work and where can folks start. Can we move to this next slide, Kira? So my educational background is international relations and political science with business administration added later. As I mentioned before, my former corporate career was focused on HR tech, diversity recruitment, and project management roles. Currently, in addition to a number of volunteer work and advocacy work, like IEEE, IEC, For Humanity, Women in AI Ethics, just to name a few, I'm trying doing both volunteer and business work. Why am I sharing this is how this relates to this session. A while back, when I started being interested in impacts of AI on social justice and societies in general, I was first intimidated, I'll be honest, by the technology. As much as I'm a technology geek as a user, I was intimidated by the technology and complexities of AI. Having been involved in recruitment and diversity work at the bank, I was well aware of the impact of corporate practices on marginalized or underrepresented groups, and that if you don't think things think things through, that you can end up adding more obstacles and burden on those groups and their access to opportunities and resources. So there was already something I had experience and knew, but there was still that intimidation. I wasn't coming from a non-technical background. Again, I wasn't sure if I would be able to understand AI correctly, make an impact or contribution, and even how that would look like. It also didn't help that a decade ago, my first interactions, so we're talking about 2010, my first interactions with those working with Python, algorithms, etc., were quant traders working on high frequency algorithmic trading in investment banks, so not the most inclusive bunch. But in the 20 years in the corporate world that I've spent, I almost never been in a role or a career role where I actually applied to the role. It has always been, being pulled to assignments where I would need to jump into the deep end to fix issues or create things from scratch. I thought, why not do it for AI ethics? Worst day, I'm gonna make a fool out of myself. But I started so working with that mindset, I started to immerse myself in reading articles, reports, listening to the trailblazers, some of the names that you would see in the Hall of Fame, but try to understand the consequences better and how to critically think about them and frame those conversations in my mind. I would like to slightly rephrase Audre Lorde, whose writings I go back so often. As a woman of color, a mother, an immigrant, and someone from a non-dominant religion in the US, there was always some part of me, usually a part of me, guaranteed to offend everybody's comfortable prejudices of who I should be. So I was experienced with those interactions with the prominent or powerful structures on a daily basis. But when I started working towards understanding AI and researching AI, I started understanding the impact of the technology day in, day out that had on me, on my family, on my network, on my community, and all of our individual and collective opportunities. So I added advocacy to my work, to my list, because change only comes when a critical mass demands it, and you can only reach a critical mass when people are aware. So right in this session, I want to talk about the title, the actual corporate world, but also the advocacy work that you might be interested in. So speaking of the advocacy works and volunteering, I contributed to Responsible Tech Guide with David Ryan Polgar and 30 plus amazing volunteers. One of the things that we did within that list was reviewing the landscape and creating this title section in the guide for those interested in coming into the world. This was meant to be a list, but what I want to point out here today is when it comes to AI ethics careers, the field is still very new and it's emerging. So there's a lot of room for flexibility in terms of roles and responsibilities. If you're interested in this work in corporate or startup environments, there are multitudes of titles that you can search for. But just looking at the titles, you can also get an understanding of the extent of the role, whether it's an all-encompassing ethics role or whether it is a more narrow one. So these are some of the ones that we could come up with looking at the landscape. Understanding the title and understanding the impact that it might have and the reach it might have is crucial, because you're also understanding what you're expected to focus on, AI ethics in general within the organization, or actually just a more specific elements or principles within that field. I want to add a cautionary note here. The titles are really reflective of the company's priorities and most of the time how that aligns with their PR statements, not necessarily meaning that the company actually walks the talk or that is their absolute priority. This is obviously not to say that they're not good examples that there are not good examples that actually do that work, that actually prioritize this and put their money where their mouth is. But what you should be aware of going into to any of these roles is whether it can, whether it will be an ethics washing role, or whether you actually will have the support and resources and tools you'll need. It's not an easy work. It's not no work obviously is easy, but being that person coming in and trying to create a new trying to create a new culture, change the mindset is really not easy, because at the end of the day, it's really is about questioning the dynamics and the motives. If anything, this week's event is a crucial reminder for all of us that ethics cannot be taken granted, and that any organization that needs to earn the trust, whether it's the consumers or the employees, is through their action. Next slide, please, Kira. As I mentioned, I had this concern myself about the backgrounds, whether my international relations or political science background was going to be relevant. And I get this question a lot. I mean, almost on a weekly basis, very regular basis, while I'm doing mentoring or coaching. Because AI impacts our lives and our jobs, our access to opportunities and resources, and because it uses data that has social, economical, and environmental elements and is reflective of the structural issues, ethical development and use of AI really needs that full ecosystem of perspectives. You know, we've been talking about diversity, but it takes a whole different dimension in this ecosystem. We need to be looking at the input and assess the impact benefiting from multiple disciplines. It is crucial, and I want to underline crucial again and again, that any team developing and deploying these tools must not only have the diversity of backgrounds, identities, and experiences, but also diversity of disciplines. You know, you might have someone coming from computer science backgrounds across your whole team. They might look different. They might have different identities, but at the end of the day, that also is not diverse enough in terms of the perspectives that you're bringing of your expertise. So not all of us might code or understand the technical research behind AI, but we all understand what it means for our lives. Like Tawana said yesterday, we know how we're being impacted. On the other hand, we know the impact for our community and society. Can we move to the next one? So let's deconstruct the AIethesis role a bit, whether it's within the organizations as a full-time doing this inside the organization, or whether you're an external consultant trying to build this. You're really expected to see the bigger picture, the greater picture in the system, and question the upstream, like the data, context, processes, and decisions, etc., as well as the downstream. What are going to be the impacts and consequences? And you're expected to identify those challenges and the opportunities, and identify the gaps within that system and all those interactions. The crucial thing here is how to ensure that this is not only done by the AI ethicist, but it's done by everyone as part of their contributions, their roles, their responsibilities. You know, it's not the AI ethicist coming in and hammering ethics on people. It really needs to be embedded in the project processes, policies, as well as the overall structures and mechanisms of the organization. It needs to be about the culture. It needs to be about the buy-in from the top down and a buy-in from the bottom up as well. You will need to work with senior management, obviously, the project teams across departmental lines. That interdisciplinary interaction might be in the form of training the stakeholders, facilitating assessment workshops, feedback gathering, listening to concerns, developing and implementing governance methods. So just like project managers do, the AI ethicist kind of touches all areas of the organization, and it is the bridge between these areas. But again, this is really about leveraging the existing knowledge inside and outside. There are amazing people. Um, there are amazing people within the organizations who are fighting, who are trying to push this work, and leveraging those knowledges and advocacy as well inside and outside the organization. It is really about helping to create the space and tools to share that knowledge and to share the concerns. Not going all the way to the whistleblower or red flags situations, which would be like pull in case of emergency. They're the nuclear options. But how do we create the culture inside the organization, and how can the AI ethicist can help the organization to create those cultures to bring up those concerns? There's also, if you're doing this job, there's also that parts of collaboration with the external parties. In order to understand the impact of your products, you need to be working with groups you're impacting, understanding their concerns, and advocate for change to ethical development and deployment of AI, working with those people. You might have heard me saying before, not parachuting, just taking notes from the design justice, not parachuting into organizations, or sorry, into communities, uh, but really not parachuting into communities to extract information, extract knowledge to improve your products, but really to be that bridge and understand their concerns and make it better for those communities while you're making your products as well. And also the last piece is advocating with internal and external parties in terms of connecting with the policymakers, the customers, regulatory bodies, think tanks, industry associations, consortiums, etc. Identifying and understanding and contributing to the best practices and bringing that back to the organization and the practices inside the organization. I know it's hard to say this week, especially this week, but my ultimate dream is to make that the role of AI ethicists obsolete, because ethical development and use have become second nature to everyone, that it is embedded in the business as usual practices. It is embedded in everyone's role. We don't have to think ethics as something on top of what we do. It should be within everyone's work. I know it's a bit of a moonshot dream, but hey, I am an optimist. Kira, would you mind sharing the next one? So how can you, so just to wrap up what I've said at the beginning and throughout the slides, how can you be more involved? How can you move into a career within AI ethics or even start advocacy? It really starts with understanding the consequences, understand it for your own self first, for your family, for your network, for the wider community, and take it to your country, your nation, whatever your community is, take it out for democracy, just like working out those logical consequences. And advocating for change, sharing the values, sharing your values and lived experiences. It's listening, learning, respecting, and then also contributing your experiences, your expertise in this, and then participating and engaging. There are multiple organizations, collectives like Women in AI Ethics, but also Black Women in AI, Latinx AI, Design Justice Networks, our data buddies that you heard from Tawana yesterday, Korean AI, Women in Machine Learning, Women in Machine Learning, etc. There's, depending on what you want, depending on what you want your path to be, your contribution to be, even if it's just 1 hour a day, be curious and get involved. It really starts with getting involved, and then it expands depending on your on how much you want to contribute. We need both expertise in multidisciplines and fields, but also lived experiences, because the lived experiences tell us the real story of the consequences, not the business reports, not the not the numbers. And before I pass it to Kira for her session, I would like to finish with another Audre Lorde quote. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to give sort of a different perspective. That was amazing. And I think that nothing I will say at its core will be very different from anything else we've heard today, but this will just sort of be my experience with the same sort of core messages. So as I said, I'm a postdoc at Columbia. I'm affiliated with the Data Science Institute in computer science. I have some titles from the National Science Foundation in math and data science. And I sound exactly like somebody with the ultimate technical expertise. I'm a researcher. I do research in mechanism design, and I'll tell you in a moment why I didn't have a path straight here. But first I want to tell you about my day job. So my day job is doing research, in particular mechanism design, which is, in addition to thinking about algorithms in AI, we think about people's incentives. So sort of the first application you might think of would be Uber, and how people who use Uber, both the drivers and the riders, have their own incentives. And so if they want to get a route that's closer to home, or if they want to pay less for a route, then they're going to try and game the system if they can, if it's not designed to align with their systems. And that's why in mechanism design, we try and think about incentives. And so what I try and work on is using that for social good. So for example, we can think about health insurance markets and how can we align incentives with insurance providers who may be trying to skim off extra money to try and maximize patient happiness. Or how can we think about how to design the mechanisms to allocate licenses to manufacturers who emit carbon such that we are trying to trade off economic value and pollution the way they do in cap and trade. Or in online labor markets, where we usually just throw an algorithm in the system, whether it's how to search, how to match, et cetera, and then what happens with all of these labor laws and mobility in a labor market and et cetera. We heard a lot about the gig economy this morning. We should think more about what algorithms we're using, what the impact is, do they adhere to our labor laws with respect to bias, and what about the incentives of the participants in the market? And additionally, I think about things like privacy. What about the fact that all of our terms of service agreements are just bilateral between a company and the user, but the fact that if you share your data, that opting in, it doesn't impact only you. So why are you the only party in that agreement? There are externalities of sharing data. So that's some of the work I do. My path here, well, let's start at the time of high school. In high school, I thought that I would build feeder sets for a living. That's what I did all day, every day after school. And then I went to a small liberal arts school where they weren't really known for science, but I wound up deciding I liked math and declaring a math major. And after my sophomore year, I tried research. Somehow I found out about research. They didn't have any research at my school, but somebody told me about these research experiences. So I went to a different school and tried it. And I had a terrible experience, in part because of demographics, also for other reasons. And so I went back to school after that and I thought, okay, I'll be a high school math teacher. That's it. No more research. That's fine. Around the same time, I started taking computer science because I'd never heard of computer science before. And so I didn't start until my third year. I took an algorithms class and it was extremely grueling and terrible, but also kind of wonderful, kind of like a Stockholm Syndrome experience. And lucky for who I am now, I had a professor who encouraged me to try research again, despite that I was really traumatized from the first experience. And I was like, this is kind of okay this time. I don't know what to do with that. And I wound up applying for grad school programs, thinking this is not a commitment. I'm just gonna do it while it's okay. And if it's not okay, I'll try something else. There is no shame in stopping. So my first year I worked on some project in Bitcoin and I didn't really like it. And I got up the nerve to tell my advisor that. And then I switched into some projects on revenue maximization. And mathematically, they were the most interesting thing to me. I just like loved playing with incentives in the mechanism design part. But obviously it kind of made me feel sick to be working on problems that were literally maximizing revenue for corporations. And so then in about May of 2016 is when I discovered the concept of what if I use mechanism design instead for social good and focus on this agenda. And so that's when things got better. And now I'm a postdoc at Columbia, and hopefully next year I will be faculty somewhere. And if you want to hire me, let me know. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about my not so day job, what I don't get paid for, which is this organization, Mechanism Design for Social Good. MD4SG started because my friend Reddy Adebebe and I both had the same feeling of, why are all of the killer applications of our research area, all of these companies and maximizing revenue, whether it's ad markets or Uber or Tinder or cloud computing, it's just how do you maximize revenue for these corporations? And so we thought, you can use this math to do other things. What about all of these topics like low-income housing allocation or healthcare or economic inequality? And so we sort of came up with a list of some topics that we thought hadn't really been explored using this concept. And we talked to a bunch of our friends. And so we got a group of about 12 people together, almost all of them junior PhD students. And we just sort of formed a list of things to look into. Each person took on a topic, and we had about 3 meetings per topic. They organized things to read from papers in social sciences to 538 articles to various sources across various fields. We met bi-weekly over Google Hangouts. I don't know if you see this list, but none of us were in the same area except for like me and my advisor. So this is 2016, by the way, this is pre-pandemic. So we were just meeting bi-weekly over Google Hangouts, and basically some other people from the community heard. And by the end of the year, a year later, we wound up organizing a workshop at the main conference in our area. And we also, this is the first time that our group ever met in person a year later at that workshop. So this is 2016 and how we started. Also, I want to add that when we first started reading papers and presenting them to each other, we also noticed that if we just emailed people and said, hey, do you want to talk about your work to us over Google Hangouts for like half an hour from your desk, you don't have to go anywhere? They were like, well, I don't know who you are and you emailed me out of the blue, but okay. I mean, people like talking about their work, so it worked out very well. So what this organization is now today is a giant multi-institutional initiative using techniques from algorithms, optimization, mechanism design, many other things in order to improve access to opportunity for historically underserved and disadvantaged communities. And so we host all kinds of events. We have our various workshops that we host annually, and this year will be a conference. We also have tutorials, etc. And now we have all types of topics in our call for papers, from AI and machine learning to empirical studies and policy and law, theory, problem pitches and demos, etc. We have researchers and practitioners from over 100 institutions in 30 countries. We have all sorts of working groups where people work together on trying to brainstorm either their own research or work together on research and just learn about a topic. We have a colloquium series where we have all online, by the way. This is almost all online, except for some of these events occur in person, except for now, none of them occur in person, of course. The colloquium series is online. We have experts from various areas, also practitioners talk. All of this you can find information about at md4sg.com. And so my biggest goal within MD4SG is to learn about adjacent research. I'm a computer scientist. And so Merve kind of hinted at this, that you can have just a team full of computer scientists and they can look different, but they're all computer scientists. And I'm a computer scientist now, but I want to learn about adjacent research in all different areas. I want to find potential problems to work on that I don't know that much about, and I want to find collaborators for the process. And so what we do as MD4SG is we facilitate connections between those with methodological expertise, with the technical expertise, those who are domain experts in various areas. If I want to work on healthcare, I shouldn't be working on it without a healthcare expert. I am not a healthcare expert. I'm a computer scientist, and I should not be working on a problem without somebody who knows about that area. And those who have experienced societal problems firsthand. If I don't have a lived experience, then why am I working on it without someone who does? we should have community engagement. We should have people who have lived experiences. And so within our organization, we have a range of participants, both at our events, within our various working groups, whether they're high school students, various parts of academia, software engineers, technical consultants, nonprofit members, etc. We also feature a range of speakers at our events, from artists to CTOs at Polaris, which is an amazing corporation. You should look it up. Sorry, not corporation, company. To people at IBM Research Africa and people at the NYC Commission on Human Rights, to people in policy schools, etc. And also, it's starting to have impact already, which I'm really excited about. For example, Tom Khalil, who was the Chief Technology Officer in Obama's White House, has been interacting with us about broadening policy and talking to think tanks. And Facebook, actually, thanks to an advocate within our research community, has been coming up with grants to fund people's proposals to work on MD4SG, and also to fund global challenges in computation. So if you have a challenge about farming in Uganda and you have a good research proposal, then they may fund you. And if you want, they might even connect you with people with more technical expertise if that's something you need. So I think it's really cool, and I hope to see it grow even more. And one last thing is that I think something we've done well is have a global presence, because we started as an online, just having Google Hangouts meetings. So for example, we had, back when we had conferences in person, we had a conference in Phoenix, but it was also live streamed to a couple of locations in the African continent. For example, this was one of the meetups in Lagos. This year we had, everything was online because of the pandemic, but we also had both a talk and a panel given in Spanish and translated live into English, just like Mia is having for this workshop. And in addition, there were 2 channels on the Zoom at all time, an English channel and a Spanish channel, and you could be in either one and always hear the talk translated into your language if it wasn't already in your language. And we also have the call for papers in Spanish. And now we've just added a working group for the Asia Pacific time zone, since time zones are so difficult. Yeah, so that's all I had to say about that. And I think we'll move to questions now.
And can I just say, wow, a huge congratulations to you and the whole team at Mechanism Design for Social Good. You can just see with your timeline and the way that you were sharing the story.
I don't really know how it's the same thing. I don't really know what happened.
I think that's it, right? It's like how a community grows from scratch, and how that it really starts with that one idea of how about we do this differently? How about we challenge the structures and do this differently and actually make something that works for people?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got some questions for you.
Okay, let's do it.
So 2006, you've co-founded the Mechanism Design for Social Good to improve access to opportunity to historically disadvantaged and underserved communities, like you mentioned. Can you tell us what was the aha moment for you with this initiative?
Yeah, so I actually went to a workshop where I saw a talk by Cynthia Dork. Cynthia Dork is both one of the founders of differential privacy and one of the founders of algorithmic fairness. And she gave a talk, it was a theoretical computer science talk. And she gave a talk about theory for society. And the message was like, here's privacy, here's fairness. We should use theory for society. And my advisor was there, and I was standing by my advisor, and she came up afterwards and was like, why aren't more people working on theory for society? Why are all of the greatest minds just maximizing revenue? And I was standing there like, oh, that's a good question. I'm just maximizing revenue, and I really like it from a technical standpoint, but why are we doing that? That is what my whole community is working on. Those are the hard problems that we're all obsessed with. And you know what? These problems are really hard technically too. So if we're only in it for the technical part, we have other hard technical problems to work on too. And so it was that talk that really inspired me, because differential privacy and algorithmic fairness are such interesting technical concepts and so important. And so that was sort of my aha moment. And I was like chatting about it to some friends of mine, and I believe Rediet had her own aha moment, and we just sort of both talked to each other at the right time, and we were like, she has so much energy. She was like, let's do it. Let's start this. Let's talk to everyone. We're gonna, and so we just went off. Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you did. And full disclosure, I love Cynthia the Works work as well. I think it really makes it a huge technical challenge, a solution, also in an understandable way as well, and has contributed so much to this field as well. So AI and tech ethics, usually taught, like I mentioned on my call, some of my own personal reservations. It's usually thought of as requiring this technical background. We're trying to break that myth today. We're trying to have everyone involved to spend more time and to contribute more. How do you see the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's work in AI ethics that doesn't require a technical background at all, that you can do interesting work without any technical background, without any technical expertise on your team at all. And then I also think that when you put together a team of people from various backgrounds, one technical person, one completely non-technical person, that you can also do interesting work. I think you can do interesting work in any formation like that. As I said, like, I will not work on something without a domain expert, without somebody who has a lived experience that's relevant. So when I work on a project about health insurance markets, I work with an expert from a school of policy whose entire research is about health insurance markets. And the technical expertise for that project was in my domain, not his domain, but I could not formulate the right questions and ask relevant questions without him. So I think it's incredibly important to put heads together and make sure, how else can you solve relevant questions? And so I think it's so important to sort of talk to each other. And that's why I think that's my favorite thing about MD for SD, is just facilitating the connections to find where your skill set, whatever your skill set is, whether it's your lived experiences or a skill set in policy or in whatever, can be so useful.
And it's such a refreshing view perspective as well, compared to the majority of the people in tech companies, especially in Silicon Valley, where everyone knows everything, and there is no need to ask anyone else or contribute to anyone else, because
no one knows everything. They just Google it. Like,
right. So you mentioned a number of different working groups under the initiative. What are some of the factors driving the selection of issues, and how can people get involved? I mean, you mentioned that there are some grants in the pipeline, there are some grants that are already working, and something that we've been trying to increase within Women in AI Ethics is, how do we highlight the work from different regions of especially women who are doing this amazing work, but don't necessarily have the funds, have the expert collaborations, or not under spotlight to expand their work. How can people get involved, like I said, and what drives that selection procedure for the work groups?
yeah, absolutely. So in terms of highlighting work, our approach was just to create our own venue. But we started by attaching it as a workshop to existing venues. So we were a workshop at a well-known conference. And so we did that for 3 years, and then we broke off as our own workshop once we already had really built our own community and were an established workshop. And we didn't let norms confine us. If we had 140 submissions and 80 of them were solid, then we had giant poster sessions and we had short talks, and we let everybody come because we have good work and we want everyone to be there, even if it's not complete work, because you can find people to help give you feedback to do better work. I mean, you don't just have to have a finished paper to present. That's not what we're about. We're about showcasing all the great work that's being done in all the various stages. And one thing I meant to highlight that I didn't was that we accept problem pitches. So just ideas of, what do you think would be a good problem to work on? Maybe you don't have whatever skills you think need to be done to solve the whole problem, but you have an idea for a problem and you either want to find other people to work on it or just give it to other people to work on. So there's that. As for the working groups, it's basically just whoever is willing to lead one. You know, if there's enough interest and somebody says, I'll lead it, and other people say, I want to learn about that too, then it forms. And that's there I think that people just email in and say, you know, can I form a working group on this? Or we have various social events and people start chatting about what if we form a working group on that? So we have a big email list, and we also have smaller events to hang out with each other, all online. And so things just kind of naturally happen that way. And so you can join the big email list. You can also just email the working group organizers if you want to get involved in a working group.
And I think I feel like that's kind of that flexibility and informal structure, and the aim being doing good, doing social good, and not necessarily siloing things that it has contributed to what you imagined at the beginning, and where I'm almost tempted not to call it initiative anymore. I think it looks like a very structured and growing thing over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
What advice, I mean, out of that, what advice would you give to anyone interested in AI and tech ethics careers, but don't know how to go about it? Whether that's like from technical backgrounds or non-technical backgrounds?
That's a good question. I think, first off, I think there's so many online resources. As Mia was saying first thing this morning, that this is creating so many online resources. I think it's sometimes hard to navigate them, but luckily a lot of people sort of aggregate them and say, here's a good list of resources. And so, for example, I know like on my website, I have a list of mechanism design resources, and I'm sure various people have a list of, you know, if you want transparency resources, if you want specifically fairness resources, there are lists of good resources out there. So if you want to try and learn yourself, they're out there. There's great videos too. Most talks are recorded these days, especially during the pandemic. Yeah. In addition, I think, as the whole last session was talking about, community is extremely important. And while in my experience, it's not super successful to cold email people, except for when you ask them to give a talk that works for some reason. Usually if you just like cold email someone asking a lot of questions, they probably won't respond. But as long as you have met someone in some personal way, even if it's just bumping into them at a conference, and then you try and ask them, they're like happy to help. People are so friendly. Maybe once in a while you find an unfriendly person, but people are so happy to answer questions and tell you about what worked for them. So I would just say forming a community and asking people, as long as you have like the tiniest connection with them.
And I would second that. I found that AI ethics failed, and the trailblazers, the people coming in, the collective, almost any initiative that I've been volunteering at or working for has been so accepting, and to your point, just trying to understand and asking the questions, even starting with that smallest connection and taking from there is huge. I started that way, it's like those immersing myself in research at one end and then asking like minor questions like, how about this, and it's like and it just grew organically, grew from there as well.
Also, to anyone who thinks that they have a non-technical background, I mean, that's what technical researchers do too. Like AI ethics, only how long has it existed as a field? How long has fairness in machine learning existed as a field? Anyone who's researching in this area is just learning it themselves. We're constantly teaching ourselves new areas and reading up on new areas. We're all just teaching ourselves constantly. That's all it is.
Yep. No, I agree with you. I'll change the perspective a bit. What keeps you at night regarding the impact of technology these days?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Not to bring down the mood, mood of the conversation, but
wow, that's a good question. I think that probably facial recognition is the scariest for me right now. Just in general, the use of these tools to do things like work for ICE or work for, God, predictive policing is terrifying to me. The use cases that we don't expect for this technology to be used, that we weren't expecting when we designed it in the first place. That's what keeps me up at night.
I think I would agree with you on that. I had a session with Branka Panic, amazing person, and she's the founder of AI for Peace and doing amazing work on AI and humanitarian work and peacekeeping and peace building. So we had a co-session, and just looking at how the facial recognition technology, biometric technology, and how it is used on the refugee communities, on immigrants, on borders, on underserved or marginalized communities inside US. And it's not only, specific to US. London is one of the most surveilled cities in the world right now. Turned it around to employee surveillance, worker surveillance in the workplace. And I have Age of Surveillance Capitalism behind me. It's like one of my Bibles that I go to. And big fan of Shoshana Zubonoff. But I agree with you. I think facial recognition, what companies are getting out of it in terms of revenue, in terms of getting all this government or even private contracts versus how that is impacting.
And it's not like any of these things are applied equally across people. They're only applied to certain people, to marginalized people. Surveillance technology in the workplace, it's not applied equally to everyone.
Absolutely, that's the thing, right? The consequences, the impact is not equal. It's always the same population. It's always the same people who are bearing the burdens of these technologies. I got one last question before we finish. How do you? I know you have this great initiative, but how do you go about advocating for ethics? When you're talking with someone trying to make the case, hopefully it doesn't do the case, but when you go about trying to advocate for it, what are your focus areas and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. My main focus areas are trying to use our methods to do better for society. That's sort of what most of my work focuses on. My more recent work is also trying to get into sort of what is happening with data as well. How are we using data? Where is it going? Are people being compensated or offered compensation before their data is just being taken from them? But most of my existing work deals with how can we use this for society? And I think it's actually kind of tough sometimes, especially on some of my communities which are a little bit more theoretical. And so people don't feel as married to making an impact. They're like, we're trying to do like interesting work and so, like, interesting technically. And I'm like, it can be both. You can make an impact and do interesting theoretical
not mutually
work.
exclusive, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard. It's for sure harder. Interdisciplinary work is always hard. Add on all these additional features you want in your work, and it's hard, but it's so rewarding. It's definitely hard, and I think that for me, I felt the best thing that I could do is sort of showcase it. And so part of what I've done is tried really hard to focus on producing the work and showing what it looks like and finding other people who are doing good work and gathering that and highlighting what I think really is the right kind of work, and then turning to my community and saying, look at this work. This is good work. You can do this work too. Here are some questions I think are interesting. You can work on them too. And that's really been one of my priorities, actually, is trying to take my community, who I know is still really obsessed with those revenue maximization problems because they are mathematically interesting, and saying, look at this other problem. I promise you it's interesting because I thought that one was interesting too.
Oh, I hear you. I know it's like we have 3 minutes left. I'll take one question and answer that myself. It's from Ellen. What tools do AIethesis use? There is no one tool. I think what I would say is every case, first of all, is understanding the context of the product or of the issue that you're dealing with, understanding where that is coming from, figuring out if AI is the solution. You know, it's like we talk about techno-solutionism and techno-chauvinism, you know, just questioning those dichotomies first. And then if it is, then understanding, looking at all the different aspects of data ethics and AI ethics. The website that I build is really for all the researchers, all the people coming in, AIethesis.org, and there's a bunch of like whole page on different frameworks, checklists, guidelines, etc. if you're interested. But at the end of the day, it really is understanding the concepts behind it, and then moving from the problem and applying what is really relevant to that problem, the context. There is no one size fits all. And the field itself is, it's still going through its birthing pains. It's an emerging field. So still trying to find those answers as well. But I'll leave it at that. Like I said, there is no one size fits all. Please make sure that you're looking at the context and the problem before you even suggest anything. Kira, I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Yeah, this has been so fun.
I had seen your slides obviously beforehand, but just having your narrative on that and just seeing how it worked out over the years, and the real impact has been amazing. And I really appreciate you being with me on the session.
Yeah, I really appreciated all of your principles too. Yeah, amazing.
Thank you. So we're gonna take a couple of minutes break, and what we're gonna do as our closing session is that we're gonna be introducing the 2020 Hall of Famers, Hall of Fame list for women in AI ethics, and it will be introduced by the collective. So last session of the day, amazing names. Stick with us, please, and thank you.